Thank you, Sheila, for that presentation.
I'll leave now, Andy, and leave you to introduce our first speaker.
Yes. Kindly leave the stage. Thank you. Right. Well, listen, we have a speaker who some of you will, of course, have seen here before, and some of you will have known for many years. He's been a familiar face in the world of crop circle research years ago, but in more recent times, he was very much involved with setting up the parallel community with Hamish Miller in its original form, and I think you'll hear a little bit about that later on. But also Richard's been very big in the lens-making world, spectacles, lenses. This is something that Richard has been somewhat of a genius with over the years. And I think there's many people in this hall who are probably wearing his glasses as we speak. But he's also somebody who has a great concern for the way the world is and where the world is going, and trying to reach that balance between moving forward positively but also being real, tackling things like politics and, geopolitical stuff. How do we bring that together with spirituality? And that, in fact, is a theme that we're going to have a little bit throughout the weekend. But Richard, I think, is going to set the scene for us and challenge, I believe, some of our alternative preconceptions. So I think you're going to find this a very interesting presentation. So please give a big round of applause for Richard Smith. Thank you.
Thank you for those generous words, Andy. Genius? I don't think so. We'll work on it. Okay, hello everybody. I'm really glad to be here again. Fantastic. Before we reach 2013, a brief word on 2012, inevitably. Now, many prophesying agencies have had a tilt at 2012. The Hopi, Nostradamus, Mother Shipton, Hollywood, the Daily Mirror, God help us. And also some physical forecasts, for example, that the sun is going to cross the galactic equator, that we're going to have a huge shift in polarity. That's all very fine. But what really and who really has got our attention are the Mayans. Now, those of you that have read Beyond 2012 by Jeff Stray, which is a scholarly work, and consider yourself deeply underprivileged if you haven't read it, so I suggest you do before next year. But part of the Mayan mystery, we know the calendar is going to end on the 21st of December next year, but we don't know why. Now, I understand there's a tablet of stone with quite a chunk missing. Well, I have to tell you, the mystery is solved. I had a phone call from South America recently, and my old business colleague of mine I hadn't spoken to for a long time, he said, "Richard, you're interested in 2012 and all the changes that are going to happen?" I said, "Sure, Ace, what have you got?" And he said, the mystery is solved. They found the piece to complete the tablet for the Mayan forecasts. So I said, "Very nice, Ace, just tell me what it said." He said, "Well, it appeared in the newspaper, and, I'm not sure you're going to like what it's going to say." And I said, "Well, Ace, just cut it. Just tell me what it's going to tell me what it says." He said, "Well, they found it, they dug it up, and they matched it with the rest of the tablet, and it said, 'Thank you for your attention. We were only joking.'" I think perhaps Murdoch's got a hand in that, don't you? But people actually expect change on the 21st of December next year. There will be some change as a result, because the collective is almost willing it. But are we going to see a catastrophe? Highly, highly unlikely. And anyway, why must we endure a catastrophe in order to collapse the old and introduce the new? Now, with your permission, I'm going to make two assumptions on your behalf. That we all agree humankind has some progress to make, and number two, that you are not perfectly adjusted to a deranged society. Do I hear some agreement there? Sorry, it's a bit early in the morning, but thank you. Thank you. Now, the third eye. Many have suggested that the third eye is the partially dormant pineal gland between the two hemispheres of the brain. Why might this pineal gland be so important? Well, it's credited with expanded clairvoyance. It's called the seat of the soul. It's the symbol of enlightenment. And the Hindus believe that if you open Shiva's third eye, you will see the end of the universe. End destruction, not quite sure. Complete restoration of emetropia is possible. Emetropia is a situation where you don't, sadly, need any correction for your eyes. This means you can see without spectacles or any other form of correction. That's what emetropia basically is. And of course, a lot of us invoke the third eye for being the mind's eye, the subject or the tool of creative thinking. So a seer may be said to have utilized the capacity to use their third eye. This is why it's important. Now, we clearly need some further insight. I think all agree we have some problems. So we need all the help we can get. And if the third eye can help us, great. So what does the pineal look like? Well, pineal, pinecone. Spiral projections of this helix resemble mini galaxies. They unfold in three-dimensional space like the DNA molecule. Now, to me, this is further evidence, further, not proof, but the fact that everything is coherent. Every single thing is linked, as we shall see. Everything is linked. So if we fail so neatly using two eyes, maybe this third eye can help us conduct a proper forensic examination of our condition, because we're not doing very well. So where is this third eye? Well, I spent 30 years in ophthalmic optics, or actually 36 to be precise, as Andy very kindly pointed out. And I've sold, I think, literally millions of lenses. I've sold machines that make lenses. I've trained the people to use the machines to make lenses. Single vision lenses, bifocal lenses, trifocal lenses, quadrifocal lenses, any kind of lens that you can dream and imagine. In the old days when we used to use a lot of glass, there were many, many more different types as well. However, I missed a trick. And I thought, gosh, after all these years in the industry, I really have missed a trick. I can't believe it. This one doesn't need a correction, but the other two do. Now, this is available. You're very welcome. You can have it. I didn't put corrective lenses in here, but you can have it with corrective lenses or plain. Okay? So, actually, I can't read a damn thing without... Okay. When I sent this to the lab, the chap on the phone, he said to me, quite seriously, he said, "Richard, what's his problem?" He needs help. I said, "Ben, how many millions of these things have you made and you haven't seen one of these before?" He said, "No, I've been in it a long time like you. I've never seen this before." He said, what's going on? Lovely. So I have a question. How many of us feel that change is in the air? We hear a lot about change. Could you raise your hand if you feel that change is in the air? Okay, that's good. I wonder how many of you feel that you know what this change is. Well, something is happening, no question. The question is, what is this feeling of change? Now, a raising of consciousness will actually get the vote, but what does that practically mean? I'm not going to analyze the whole consciousness thing, but to me, this is a raising of overall awareness. And I think we all agree, or most of us would agree, that the awareness levels are rising. Now, philosophical thought examines the ideas and discusses those five main areas that are of no concern to science. And this is where, in my opinion, we're starting to lose things. We rely an awful lot on science. And those 5 areas: logic, ethics, politics, metaphysics, and aesthetics. Many of you will recognize those as the 5 central tenets of philosophy. We seem to have all but abandoned serious debate on these 5 subjects. And when we stop thinking, when we stop debating, when we stop questioning, then the trouble starts, because we leave an intellectual vacuum and invest a lot in science. And that, I believe, is what's happened. And it's changing. And this is the change I think we're beginning to think once more. And it begins within each of us. Gridlock. Are we experiencing gridlock? Pick up the phone and you listen to the following menu of opportunities. Press 1 to go to hell. Press 2 to stay in hell. Press 3 to choose which kind of hell you would like to go to. Press 4 if you want to hear all the hell options all over again. I am sick and tired of it. I had run-ins with insurance companies this year, and I said, now, cut all the nonsense. Do you actually give a damn whether I'm on the phone to you giving you business or not? Oh, of course, customers are important. I said, no, they're not. They're absolutely not. I've had to wait 10 minutes to get hold of you people and listen to this ridiculous litany on the horn. There are so many of us that the conventional customer-supplier relationships are actually going to hell. So that's the hell menu. Too many of us, too many pressures, and just the niceties of life are starting to cave in. Is the urge for change setting the agenda on several levels? Oh, yeah, you bet it is. Now, we abandoned television 4 years ago at home, but we went down to France on holiday this year, and we had a TV in there. It's quite exceptional watching this thing for a bit. On the 3rd of June, 7:30 in the morning, we watched BBC Breakfast News. This was an education, I can promise. What did we have? We had an 8-foot child's train set in the studio. We had a trip around York Museum looking at the artifacts. We had a discussion on metal detecting, and oh yeah, by the way, 4 people got killed in a refinery accident in West Wales. This took up, and a bit of sport, of course, this took up a half an hour of prime-time morning BBC. This is called news. This is not news, this is infotainment. This is an insult to the collective intelligence who can be fagged to turn in and watch this stuff in the morning. The nearest you can honestly get is Radio 4, in my opinion. That's the only BBC organ where you've got a sporting chance of hearing something decent. But we have to watch Al Jazeera, Press TV, Edge Media TV, bless them, and various other. And for the first time, who would imagine watching Russian television is going to tell us more than our own people do? This is bonkers. This is nuts. So since the owned media channel news is filtered by vested interest, you're offered what they want you to see and hear. And do they know that we know? Oh yeah, certainly they do. But you now have to evaluate the web information for its truth content. And beware government interference, because they know how to manipulate this. I'm indebted to Theo Chalmers of Edge Media TV. We bumped into Edge Media TV. Ian, Andy, everybody was on it, fantastic. And remember, they're watching you, watching us, watching them. How true is that? Absolutely. Now, the government will actually plant bloggers to use the web. The Chinese government have got 280,000 full-time employees putting the government point of view on the web. 280,000, that's a lot of people, even for the Chinese population. So in short, we no longer have trust in the information that comes via our elected representatives or their media organs. And this is serious because it places a lot of pressure on you to figure out where the truth actually lies. So you have to sift all the stuff that's out there to find out really what's happening. Beware also overblown conspiracists. You have to become a trained bullshit spotter. And this often comes with a $29.95 price tag. So you have to really, really, really spend a lot of time paying attention to this. Now, we seem to be facing a managed, systemic, geopolitical, and economic international failure. I'm sure other speakers are going to have a lot to say about this, but you choose who might be doing this. The bankers, Bilderbergers, the IMF, combination of all these things. You'll be offered some choices this weekend. So can we make this change awareness that we feel become the start of the humanist era? Now, I really hope we can do this. I mean, real change actually can happen. And you could cite, for example, solidarity in Poland, beginning the destruction of the USSR, Berlin Wall coming down. Change actually can really happen. And don't forget, Blair is no longer Prime Minister. This is neat. Now, we could add truth to this list, although the words Blair and truth actually don't sit very comfortably together. Now, very briefly, you will recall that Blair and Bush 43 had a wonderful relationship. And you also know that Blair used to go down to Texas and see the man. Well, in Texas, as you know, everything is bigger than everywhere else. And they have massive big flies in Texas. These flies spend most of their time around the rear end of a horse. So it won't surprise you to know the Texans call them horses' ass flies. So Blair is down there on the ranch with George Bush 43, and these flies are all around Blair's head, and he's trying to fight these flies off. And a ranch hand comes past and says, "Horse's ass." And Bush 43 says, "Come here, boy. You calling my friend Tony a horse's ass?" He says, "Hell no, sir. I wouldn't dream of calling a high-elected representative of the world a horse's ass." And Bush said, "Very good." And Blair carries on fighting the flies. The ranch hand walks away and says, "But I never did any of them flies to make a mistake." I suspect you're going to hear a lot about truth at this symposium, so let's look at what constitutes the truth. Now, there are two kinds of truth. Now, this is not a trick question. How many of you would agree with me that 2 + 2 = 4? Hand, please. This is not fancy question. Okay. I need a third lens. These lights are something else. Okay. Now, it's not a trick question because the truth actually does come in two forms. Number one, a priori, which is truth beforehand. And 2 and 2 to me is 4. I don't need any justifications about that. I know there are all sorts of ways around it, but 2 and 2 to me = 4. That is truth a priori. There is truth a posteriori, which is truth after examination of the facts. Now, to me, the truth can be described as a scientific conclusion. But surely, the truth is a fact. It's a foregone conclusion, or it should be. But let's just have a brief analysis of this list. John Kennedy, for example. Why were the doctors muzzled and not able to say exactly what happened to that man? The story we've been given is patently untrue. The moon landings. When you see a film of these 3 guys come back from an epoch-making trip, they've been to another planet. Did you ever see 3 more miserable people in your whole life? They sat there more pissed off than anyone I've ever seen. It's like they've just been done for drunken driving. These people were incredibly fed up. What did they see? I'm sure you're going to hear what they probably did see later on. Diana, Princess of Wales, fascinating. In France, I have a relative, and he said to me there was an hour-long documentary on the death of Princess Diana recently, and we were not allowed to see it in this country. Every single Frenchman you meet knows she was killed. We know because we have somebody, as I say, my cousin has medical friends. She was alive when she made it to the hospital, and the English came in and said, "We'll take over now." Then she didn't make it. But okay, a lot of information on the Diana thing. I'm not going to repeat all that. 9/11 and 7/7, well, 9/11, honestly, how they get away with this is a mystery. The smoking gun, the pictures that Andrew Johnson and Dr. Judy Wood have come up with, shows steel reduced to dust. The things were designed to take aeroplanes, the infrastructure, where's the building gone? The whole thing is just complete nonsense. David Kelly, we know, you heard last year, Norman Baker, on this, I think it was last year, on this stage, convincingly showing us that David Kelly was murdered as a result of the Iraqi adventure, which was an illegal Blairite war. So there's no, please, ridiculous. And also the UFO data since 1945. If all that was actually produced for us, that would be very nice, because we could stop all the nonsense. Now, if this list is solved, so what? Supposing everybody responsible for all these nefarious acts then says, "Yep, it was us. We did it. We killed her. There was stuff on the moon. We shot Kennedy, not the other guy, etc., etc." What are you going to do with it then? Do we go on to the next conference denouncing the liars and using emotive language such as war on truth? And the war on truth doesn't sound too much like the war on terror. It's emotive language. But so what? What are we going to do? We have to organize change ourselves to avoid this before we simply cease to believe anything. And we're dangerously close to this now. Even the conspiracy theorists are beginning to disagree amongst themselves. We need to successfully eliminate institutionalized lying, or we will continue to hear of conspiracy theories which highlight our distrust of government. And this will continue to undermine our trust in that most indelicate area of philosophical discussion, which is politics. And politics, after all, is the art of social organization. And it's serious. It's not a game. Social organization is serious. Essentially, fresh, collective, deep thinking and reasoning are paramount. We're looking here at profound re-education, whether we approve or not. And nothing less than an entire re-examination of what we do, how we do it, and what's important to us and why, and we need a questioning of moral values away from nihilism and individualism and towards genuine community. This is essential, or we do face an Orwellian future which is not of our choosing, and it's one that we unconsciously invite. Inaction means connivance with others unknown to us, taking us in directions we neither voted for nor approve of. If we believe 10% of the alternative view forecasts of a new world order, population reduction, non-fossil fuel technology which is already available, and so on, we truly have got an awesome problem. And we've either got it now or it's coming up very quickly. So after 2012, what next? Well, we can view history in two ways. One of which, action. That involves events and personalities. So it involves people like Napoleon, it involves people, events like the First War, the Second War, and so on. So those are events, those are personalities. That's how we can look at history. The second way is looking at history through emotion. For example, the Age of the Enlightenment or the Industrial Revolution. This takes time and can be viewed over a long period. So how will this current period be considered in retrospect? Well, in 1989, when the Berlin Wall or the East German, the whole communist thing collapsed, the theory which is nothing new, it actually was first propounded after the Battle of Austerlitz in 1806, I think it was, the end of history and the last man. The end of history basically meant that the democracy had won, the whole world was actually tuning into the fact that one man, one vote, etc., was a really good plan, and everybody would then quietly get on with making money and be quite happy. That was fundamentally, in broad terms, the whole point of the end of history. But it didn't quite work out like that. We still have variations of democracy, we still have communism, so that in turn has been called the return of history and the end of dreams. In other words, that wonderful semi-utopia vision never quite happened. So will this appear as a chaotic and badly managed descent leading to the oblivion of civilization or the start of the humanist era? It would be a wonderful epitaph for our generation if we started the big fix. Why not? Wow, we started to repair all this. Civilizations have come and gone, so why should our fate be any different? Well, every 43 years, something major seems to happen. The last period, the current one, 2004 to 47, will certainly be the fastest. Well, that sounds slightly oxymoronic, but it is true, as we shall see. So can we keep up with the ethical challenges our inventive imaginations present us with? Well, the growing challenge for all of us, as always, is the constantly widening gap between the results of our technological innovation and our inability to manage those results, which always seems to come with the law of unintended consequences. This imbalance actually still may be said to be at the root of our current problems. World population, wow, we have some big challenges here. Overpopulation, planetary pollution, world misgovernance are the three main big ones as a result of this. And I personally believe 9 billion will be the maximum. And the reason for that is the agrarian shift around the world will eventually stop as everything moves into more and more into the cities, and it's happening very, very quickly in the subcontinents. India and China are responsible for 43% of the world population. Pakistan, places like this, growing immensely quickly, and the move to the cities continues. One thing I'm not quite sure about is, for example, the project for the new American century calls for a reduction in population. Now, I'm not quite sure I understand why they want to do this, because the fewer people we have around the place consuming, there's less need for the factories, there's less need for the goods, there's less need for the motor cars, everything else. So I struggle slightly. I hear numbers of 1 billion, and then I hear 500 million, and of course the only way they're going to do that is basically starve us to death or control the food chain, which they seem to be successfully doing. So that's why I think that's unlikely. Take China, for example, highly populated country. The one-child policy has backfired. They don't have enough people in the factories to make the kit to sell us, which is fine because we don't have the money to buy it now anyway. Okay. People and wealth. We need to stop fake, multinational, unaccountable political creations, like the European Union, where 2 and 2 don't equal 4. They haven't signed off their accounts for 15 years now. This is ridiculous. And they these creations ignore national integrity. They create fake economics. They make fake financial instruments nobody understands, least of all the fake people who invent them. This is nuts. This is completely nuts. So why does that matter? It matters because bigger economic zones mean much more control over more people with fewer people in charge. So we have the European Union, the possibility of what they, I think, are going to call a Miro, which is Canada, America, and Mexico. Then we have the Asian states, ASEA, China, India, and so on, the Thailand, Cambodia, all these people. So we will let that happen if we do nothing. So when you look at this, you can see exactly world population. The developed world is 20% responsible for 55% of the GDP. Here's the opportunity on this chart, because the developing nations have 66% of the people, but only 42% of the GDP. This is where the imbalance, severe imbalance is. Now, it was growing quite nicely and steadily towards some sort of balance, and then the bankers hit town in 2008 and screwed everybody, me included. So that's a big problem. World MPs. Now, this is not a world government proposal. Please, God, this is not a world government proposal. This is a revitalization of the United Nations, because the United Nations actually is all we have. There is no chance of inventing anything between now and when we need it, which is now. I would... 191 nations in the... I think with the addition of South Sudan, there are now 191 nations. I would have 2 representatives per nation involved here. One of them would sit full-time, and another one would back that person up when they're not available. These would be elected by populations of nations with validated universal suffrage election procedures overseen by the United Nations. I would make electronic voting illegal. Look at the fiddling that went on with George Bush in Florida, that hanging Chad business. And I think our own country here in the UK is subject to enormous rackets as far as electronic voting is concerned. It's not going to happen. It shouldn't happen. And I would consider making voting compulsory. I would also grant a free trade export license, and when I mean free trade, the ability, if somebody in Africa wants to sell coffee to us in England, he should be allowed to do it. Forget all these fake tariffs that they call free trade. It isn't. Look at the free trade talks. They never come to an honest conclusion, and the poor countries still stay poor. Now, those nations that pass that universal suffrage test would be granted a free export license, free trade export license. All national governments, I would get to issue and control their own money supply. Now, why is that important? Because they've given it to the banks, and look what the banks are doing to us. The banks should simply handle money. That's what they used to do. Now, the nation-state therefore retains responsibility for its own fiscal affairs, and it's responsible to its own electorate. So if they screw up, they get chucked out. That should be the way it works. And I would also have every country have a referendum system which is based on the Swiss model. Anyone here from Switzerland? Congratulations, you actually live in a democracy as far as I understand. You're the only ones. I would have salaried MPs, for example. Now, MPs first drew a salary in 1911. Look what's happened since. Thieving bastards. Unbelievable. If they were salaried properly, no outside interests, no conflict of interest, any competent sales manager, in fact, give me the Houses of Parliament and an agreed set of numbers, and it would take me 30 minutes to devise a system whereby they submitted an expense account and got paid. 30 minutes is what it would take anybody who's ever run a sales force to do. It ain't hard. If you have £100 a night allowance, that's what you get. And if you don't submit it on time, you don't get it. Perfectly simple. Now, all this is actually just a suggested beginning, but we've got to start the debate. And don't anybody ever get sucked into this whole theory of world government, because I can promise you it will be hijacked by the bankers, because they're going to bankroll it. Okay? So absolutely no, no, no. Now, while we think about our next moves, there are 3 things in this current era that we really ought to consider. And again, genuine free trade, because free trade, as I mentioned now, is not. And genuine free trade actually will help the world go round, quite literally. Honest education of the young. The young actually are being conned, and I think they know they're being conned. The stated belief that they want 50% of the UK population to go to university is absolutely absurd, because where are the jobs going to come from for these people? Moral relativism, and for those of you unfamiliar with the theory of moral relativism, it means that your opinion is just as good as mine. Everybody gets a prize. We don't do failure anymore. We have a thing called deferred success. Excuse me. Excuse me, either you pass the exam or you don't. That's not allowed now. This is ridiculous. And the young know they're being conned. And also, it is disgusting, and I use the word, it's quite an emotive word, but it is disgusting to charge people for their education. Disgusting. Here's why. And I had a long conversation with somebody in France on this, and he said, I never thought of this particular aspect. If you charge the kids £9,000 a year, which is what the proposals are in the UK, to go to college for 3 years, and they come out with a £27,000 debt, okay, this makes them an enforced conservative. They will wear a tie, they will wear a suit, and they may not tell their boss to shove his job where the moon don't shine. They are part of the system, they are trapped, and this is before wife, children, house. Fabulous, isn't it? How society can be corralled right down the funnel. That, to me, is the major upset. The system whereby if you're bright enough, you should be able to go is right. And the idea that your opinion or my opinion has equal validity is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. So moral relativism is a destructive thing, and that's what's going on. It's also disgusting that 1 billion people are hungry. 1 billion people don't have access to clean water, shelter. This is ridiculous when there's piles of food hanging around the world doing nothing and being speculated on. Now, for God's sake, if there are hungry people, why can't we just move the food to where the people are? So everyone says, oh, it costs money. Tough. Move the food to people who need it. This is ridiculous, isn't it? I think it is. I don't like seeing hordes of severely overweight people and then people starving to death. This is ridiculous. This brings us to technology. Now, singularity is a term that's been borrowed from astrophysics. When you get to the middle of a black hole, are the law of physics actually suspended? Well, we don't really know. Moore's law actually states that the number of transistors that you can cram onto a microchip doubles about every 2 years. And how's that measured? It's the millions of information processing or instructions that you can actually cram onto that disk. So the change in computing power is measured in millions of processing instructions per second. Now, when I started this talk at 10 past 10, and I will finish, I guess, around about 11 minutes past 10, in that 60 minutes, the computing industry has developed more than it did in the first 90 years of its existence. So when you sat in your chair and you get up again, that's how fast this is going. Now, we acknowledge we struggle with the ethical consequences of our technological advances. However, what's going to happen when artificial intelligence surpasses human intelligence? It's slated to do this in 2047. There will be more artificial intelligence around than there is human intelligence. So who or what is going to be running the world? And this is not science fiction. Who or what will be running the world? It's a little bit difficult to take in that. And 2047, we're going to be outclassed by the machines. And remember, science does not inquire into the values and ideal possibilities of things, nor into their final and total significance. Science is content to show their present actuality and operation only. And we need to be thinking about the other things. And apparently, with quantum computing, I don't understand anything about quantum computing, we have seen nothing yet. We can't even imagine how quick this is going to become. It's going to leave us standing. So we're going to be at 2047 with kit we really, really cannot keep up with. It's bad enough now. So a naive and international belief that science is going to solve our problems is an abrogation of our responsibility. We're turning our back, the scientists will fix it, that's okay, we'll fix everything. And then we turn around and complain they're messing with the weather and everything else. We can't have it both ways. Beanstalks are so yesterday. Meet Jack. Jack is my youngest grandson. This picture was taken not so long ago when he was 3. And he's talking to a lady here who's almost 90. She's stone deaf, and Jack is showing this lady an iPad. Well, I saw Jack a year ago, and I think the calculation works on the 2 + 2 theory that he was 2 at the time. He was showing me his father's iPhone, and he's still wearing nappies. So I think, my God, I can't use an iPhone. I have to accept I haven't got one. I don't want one. I don't need one, etc. This little boy was showing me how to use his father's iPhone. Now, his father has got a position of responsibility. His client list is Microsoft and Vodafone and all the big stuff. So all the kit comes into the house before the rest of us even know it's been invented. So he has got a head start. But even so, it just demonstrates just how fast technology has become. Much is very useful, but of course it's not all good news. Now, the bad news is, the really bad news is, that some of it's been around a long time. Television. The one-eyed monster in the room. Having abandoned television in September 2007, it was a year or two later I suddenly realized how pervasive this damn thing is. It's extraordinary. When you get rid of... How many people in this room don't have a TV? There are some. Brilliant. I think it's probably something in the order of 96% of people have them, 4% don't. The liberation when you don't have a television is stunning. It's like eventually, and the curtains, believe me, they part very, very slowly. So I suggest you, I'm not going to bang on about that too much, but I suggest you read Dr. Eric Sigman's book, Remotely Controlled. It's a fantastic analysis about what it's doing to the children, what the subliminal messages are, everything else. Very, very good book to read. He basically propounds the theory that we do live, and we really do live now, in a screenocracy. Everything's got a screen with it. Okay? Talking of screens, in 2009, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology found that it's possible to predict the sexual orientation of Facebook users by analyzing their friends. Guys, you don't even have to tell them you're gay, they already know. Okay? That's how pervasive this is getting. I mean, this is serious. Digital surveillance is incredibly cheap. The old days of guys in Max in the Rain and Homburg hats under Adolf Hitler, Joe Stalin, all these people, that was expensive. That was terribly expensive. Now the digital surveillance system is so cheap and so easy and so everywhere. I mean, human chip implants, product chip implants, money chip implants, etc. ID cards, thank God we got rid of that prospect here for the time being, but we need to carry on fighting. Are we going to accept all these intrusions and pass all personal and product movement to central cloud computing management databases run by God knows who? Now, I hope he does, because I don't. This prospect is frightening, absolutely frightening. We need to identify the barriers to our development. And in dealing with these barriers, we'll surely be able to resist what seems to many to be inevitable, the New World Order, which incidentally is freely admitted to by the politicians. It's on countless films. You can see Clinton, Blair, God knows it. They're all actually owning up to this whole thing of New World Order. So the 4 barriers to the development of humanism. 4 reasons why comprehensive global reform is required and why change is both inevitable and vitally necessary. And failure to make these changes could be catastrophic. So let's look at these one by one. What's a woodpecker got to do with democracy? Well, he's not a harp secret weapon, and he is leaning a bit to the left, but it just shows that he hasn't got to pay a mortgage for his house. We need to redefine and revitalize democracy. And the Swiss referendum system I mentioned is one way of doing this. And we need to reduce the number of UK MPs. I'll talk about the UK briefly because that's what I know most about. We need to reduce those to about 250. Those of you that heard me talk about this before, why we need 600 people ripping us off, we could do with 250, no problem whatsoever. We can run the expenses with 250 people, and we actually get an honest representation. A system based on property ownership is bound to falter. In fact, it's probably bound to fail. Personal property debt works very well in inflationary times for the individual, but it doesn't work for the economy. So when the currency is rapidly becoming worthless, that's bad for the economy, but it inflates your way out of the problem. So your mortgage becomes worth less and less. In low inflation times, which is good for the economy, mortgages become a debt burden. And then you start hearing this word slavery. If you've got a mortgage, you're a slave. And in point of fact, they will then turn around and say, well, you volunteered for it. You signed up for it. So what's good for the individual is bad for the economy, and vice versa. And this is why the property scenario is flawed. So we need to work on that one. If, for example, you were to buy a house for £150,000, 5% compound interest over the next 7 years, because we move every 7 years, it would then become worth £211,000. You could rig some law or other, rig's a bad word, you could arrange some law or other which actually could stabilise the lower end of the market, perhaps. Worth talking about. But do we want our MPs to be social workers or legislators? We don't appear to have decided. If we have a problem, as we did trying to get the TV licensing authority off our backs, I think some of you have heard this before, then I roped in the MP, or rather my wife did. She said, are they going to come with guns and grappling irons and force their way into our property? Because they're not an authority at all. They're a division of the BBC. But you try telling them you haven't got a television, really hard. Or do we want our MPs to be legislators? In other words, represent those areas of concern that we have got a lot of people in the community interested in, say, right, I've got a referendum here with 1 million signatures on it that says I don't like this. Do something about it. We need to decide what we want from our MPs. And why must democracy be always exportable in a form that's acceptable to the USA? Because that is what seems to be happening, and I can promise you this. Afghanistan will never, ever, ever, ever accept any form of democracy along the lines understood by North America. Pakistan, the same, exactly the same. These are pivotal countries in the so-called upset with terrorism, etc. They are not going to do it. It simply isn't in the psyche. No way. Be very, very wary of world government, because we need to prevent the banks from taking over, and we may be too late. This is the problem. This is why the nation state is not and must not be finished. Those people who talk about these grand fake unions, European Union, look at it. God's sake. The nation state is not over. It cannot be over, because if the nation state is gone, believe me, your voice goes with it. Increasing wealth. Keep striving, folks. Keep doing it. Keep after more. More is good for you. Don't stop consuming stuff pointlessly. Don't stop. Keep doing it. Increasing wealth. We're obsessed with becoming. Everyone's obsessed with becoming. What's wrong with being? So these constant, you've got to do this, you strive after that. Crazy. But it keeps the economic wheels turning, so that's why it's done. Few people will dispute that there's a widespread belief that ever increasing pile of wealth actually will bring you happiness and a sense of personal meaning. Well, it's really strange. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't appear to work like that. Very rich people seem to be very miserable. We're exhorted to save for our retirement via pension schemes. Pensions are a giant Ponzi scheme. Those of you who have heard the name Ponzi, he was an Italian guy who invented pyramid selling. Very simply, shaped like a pyramid, you get lots of people coming in the bottom giving you money, and you pay out at the top to less people. You are reliant on many more people coming up on the bottom to pay you out at the top. So when it comes to pensions, you need a population that's coming up underneath contributing to make sure you get your share. There is a problem. You may have noticed I'm not wearing a shirt. Those bastards at Equitable Life stole my shirt. They stole my shirt. How did they do this? Well, when you pay in a pension, they invest the money on your behalf. Now, in the early 1980s, I took out a pension plan, and they gave me a guaranteed annuity rate. They said when I retired, I would get this rate. And then they suddenly decided, oh dear, we can't afford it. So they just wrote to all of us and said, you lose 20% of what you've got in your pension fund. Oh, thanks. What do you expect me to do? Say thank you? This is ridiculous. Some people lost colossal amounts of future savings, and this was an outfit been going since the 18th century. You were entitled to think, if they'd been in business 250 years, that your dough was okay. Not a bit. Enough money is very useful, but money is a poor objective in itself. After all, what is wealth? Too often it is seen as success. Success is the way you feel inside. It ain't nothing to do with money. So how can we begin fiscal global reform? It's all very well to criticize it, but what are we going to do? You know what I do? I'd make the money follow us. They always say follow the money, like it's an out-of-control dog. Well, make the money follow us. International accounting systems should be signed up to by every nation. And a national failure to submit properly audited accounts by the UN within 6 months of the year end would result in the loss of your national export license. So in other words, if you don't file the numbers, you are not going to be able to sell your stuff, which is going to upset your population and make you do your numbers. Now, the European Union is a disgraceful example of this. Absolutely. Failure to file their accounts of 15 years is the greatest example of piss-poor accounting you're ever likely to meet. And we're part of this. Crackers. Meet the Pinky and Perky of war criminality. Now, to understand, talking of extremism, everyone thinks, oh, Al-Qaeda. To understand the origins of Al-Qaeda and why Al-Qaeda does what it does, you need to read a book called The Looming Towers by Lawrence Wright. Forget the propaganda, forget what North America tells you. Read The Looming Towers by Lawrence Wright. That'll tell you why there's all this upset and fuss. This will tell you the facts about what is going on with Al-Qaeda. Sadly, change is unlikely to happen in those areas of extreme religious conservatism for a myriad of reasons. Fundamentalism is conservative, it's not extremist. Now, the correct use of language is vital here, because to pejoratively label religious groups per se as fundamentalists is not correct. So we need to be very careful about the language. Religious-backed violence is extremist. But it's also extremist of Western governments to convince us that we have to lose personal freedoms in order to stay free. Bullshit. Bullshit, bullshit. And we don't need to sit back and just blindly take it. The beast with red cheeks. Those of you who have been involved with any kind of philosophical study will know that this is, of course, us. The absence of a sense of coherence means that increased individualism and moral relativism is destroying community at every level. We're actively betraying society in favor of our individual rights. Me, all the time. It's not right. Small is no longer beautiful. The village is first national. That's why I say the nation state should not be finished, and then global. We must re-examine our role in society. And if we can recognize that we're not the center of the universe and that we're simply 1/7 billionth of humanity, i.e. we are a grain of sand on the beach, then we can truly know that we're in this together. Why can't we admit this? Are we truly blind or simply stupid? Because that's what it boils down to. We are 1/7 billionth of what happens. Everything is connected. Jim Lyons called it the intelligent ether. I think that's wonderful. It's a jigsaw. We co-depend on each other. For every action, there's a reaction. Every single one. You can do nothing without a consequence. So do we each have to experience something in order to persuade us that this is so? It seems that way. It's time for us to really think. It's time for us to really see. And it's time for us to truly acknowledge that the power and the ability to influence real change lies within each of us. If you don't like the way the world is, you can change it. You can change it. If you do nothing, you get nothing. Utilize the most amazing machine ever invented. Find the instruction manual. Look in the mirror every morning. There's where the machine is, and that's where the instruction manual is. Okay? That's where it is. Those of you fortunate enough to meet this gentleman, Hamish Miller, doyen of dowsers, blacksmith, overall very, very nice guy. He stood on this stage in 2006 after his trip to New Zealand, and he was talking about subtle earth energy shapes and patterns and so on his trip. Now, these are the sorts of patterns that Hamish came up with on the slides. And I sat at the back and I nudged my wife and I said, geez, you recognize this stuff? She said, well, no. She doesn't spend a lot of time in lens-making laboratories. I don't blame her. But I do. And this is exactly the shape that we use. When you cut a lens, you can't then put it into the frame and wear it because you'll never see through it. It needs to be polished. And these interfaces are exactly the same shape as the interfaces we use to polish lenses. And there Hamish is saying he's found these on the ground in New Zealand. Boom. Pennies start dropping. Wow, things really are all interconnected. There really is. Nothing that isn't like that. Nothing. On your eye test form, when you go and get an eye exam, and I'm not going to ask you again whether there's anyone in the audience who's never had an eye test. Poor for business if you haven't. Okay? You have three boxes. You have sphere, you have CYL, cylinder, and you have axis. The sphere is self-explanatory, round, like a squash ball. Cylinder is the astigmatic element. If you get a squash ball, press between thumb and forefinger and do this, you bend it slightly. That's what astigmatism is. And you will bend it between the number of 0 and 180. That's it. Now, on this particular diagram here, which I'm indebted to Jim Lyons, it's the basic model for every single crop circle as well. Every crop circle actually has this fundamental geometry involved, every one. But it also, where it says sphere, torus, toroidal surface. You've heard Jim talking about toroids. Toroids, to us, a toric lens surface is an astigmatic one, effectively. Okay? So here we have, you see on this protractor now, 0 to 180. So for in every axis of astigmatism between 0 and 180, it's there. And you also have the star tetrahedron, and you'll see the spiral, which is looks like a mini galaxy. So every single thing is interconnected. Can't get away from this. Hamish heard a comment from somebody who said, mankind actually has the right to live in peace and everyone has the right to claim that for themselves. And he thought, ooh, yeah, I like this. This is great. This was the beginning of parallel community. And Hamish, a whole group of us in the west of Cornwall, started parallel community in late 2006. The objective is that we have society generally, the status quo will go along doing what it does quite happily, that's fine. But another group of people who simply feel disenfranchised, they have no voice, that runs alongside. So all those people who say, nobody listens to me, it doesn't matter who I vote for, these people are actually completely out of the loop. So the idea was that parallel community would offer them, if you like, an umbrella under which they could shelter and put their ideas forward and would be listened to. That was the plan. And it's still running. Okay? But initiatives like this require an acknowledgement from many people that change can happen, and small groups carry on being just that. Now imagine, it's hard enough for the small groups operating in the nation state, but imagine in the massive, stupid, fake European Union type situation. No way, it'll just vanish. There is a DVD available from Parallel Community, parallelcommunity.com. On the bottom of the cover, it says here, let's get together and bring back some common sense into the world. Wouldn't that be nice? Now, September last year, a group of us met in Hamish's house, where his wife's bar still lives, to have a meeting about the direction of Parallel Community, where to go next. Natasha, who comes from Holland, she runs the website. She didn't know Hamish in 2006. She didn't know me. She didn't know my wife. Didn't know anybody else. Didn't know anything about Parallel Community. She said before this meeting, can we have a couple of minutes just to slow down and think about what we're doing and so on. So we said, fine. She wrote down, she said, something's come through, and I find channeling enormously difficult, personally. But she said, something's come through, and it may be important, I don't know. And she wrote down these 3 diagrams. Look at number 2 in the middle here. And it says, diamond, polish the diamond. Remember Hamish's shapes from New Zealand? Here's Hamish's shape, not so different, right? Look at number 2. Hamish's fit. Now, that is an actual lens polishing pad. Now, you tell me that Hamish wasn't supervising in some way, shape, or form. Okay. There's no question the man was there. That was the kind of guy he was. And he had had near-death experiences. He knew something happened afterwards. He absolutely did. So to me, the man was there getting himself involved. I sent one of these polishing pads around all 8 of the core group of parallel communities so they could actually chew this thing, suck it, smell it, stroke it. This wasn't a picture on a diagram. This actually exists. And that was Hamish's way of telling us, I'm around, guys, and Natasha could never have known this. So, and Hamish was absolutely convinced about afterlife situation. Oh, boy. Okay. 7 stages of humankind today: infant, adolescent, apprentice, conformist. Okay, infant, adolescent, teacher, and healer. Those 3 actually have no question marks over them. They're ego. This is because they are ego-free. We actually need to dump our ego. The others, we're getting into the system. We're becoming tuned to the system. Anyone recognize this politician in this guy? No? William Hague? Actually, it's me 60 years ago, but okay. Okay, we look, but do we see? This is basically, if we were awake or we sleep for 8 hours a day, we're awake for 5,800 odd hours. Those are the waking hours, and we show 10% efficiency, basically. If we use 10% efficiency, we are actually being real for about 96 minutes a day, which is probably a gross exaggeration. So we are we don't utilize what we've got. Galileo was wrong. The world revolves around me. Well, that's absolutely true. No question about it, because if there was no you, what use would the world be? Philosophically, perfectly simple. You are the center of it all. Socrates, this guy was the original truth guy. He was the original truth peddler. He said no one person could ever know everything. He started the truth movement. Good man. Plato, he developed Socrates' ideas. The original novelist, he said, thank God I was born Greek, but above all that I was born in the age of Socrates. These guys, and he was the first communist, Plato. He said the masses weren't worth a damn unless you educated them. If you read his Republic, you follow that. Aristotle, dear is Plato, dearer still is the truth. He produced the organon of logic. He trained medieval Europe thought in reasoning and constructed the terminology of modern science. And he gave mankind science and a handbook of propriety rather than as a stimulus to improvement. So these guys really ran the entire system for 1900 years. They contributed, they did something. Until Descartes came along, he was the first guy that actually said, right, we have body, we have soul. He was the first dualist. He was the one that said, right, okay. He said, I think, therefore I am. Kant said, I think, therefore I think. And I think, or I say, I think, therefore I think I am. He was the first philosophical schizophrenic, fundamentally. Okay, where do you think you're going? You're there already. You are actually, you're there. Dump your ego and understand that the present is freedom, absolutely. How'd you get there? By either meditation and philosophical reasoning or a combination of both. You can't lie to yourself. Give yourself some time, dump the television. Contained in the Oxford English Dictionary of Freedom definitions is boldness of conception. And that boldness lies in the realization that you are free. Is freedom a fallacy? Do we live or do we exist? Well, people who live actually they understand they're one of the 7 billionth. So their death is not a particularly big deal. They know it's not a subtraction from what they do, and they'll move on to something else. People who exist complain about it all. They haven't worked it out yet, that they are not the center of everything, and that's why they're afraid of dying. A little bird told me, my wife, all of this is not to say we shouldn't question events that defy our understanding of reality, and my wife wrote this, and there are copies available outside, to share her experiences in the hope that others who might have had similar paranormal experiences might share some conclusions. How and Why Publishing, HOWANNWAI publishing.co.uk. Our challenge, Gaia actually has now got a lawyer. Polly Higgins. We've done £10 trillion worth of environmental damage. And she says she wants to actually recognize ecocide as the 5th crime against humanity, lined up against genocide, war crimes, crimes of humanity, crimes of aggression. Good idea. Stop buggering about with the planet. Finally, Jean Girardot's play Electra, which is all to do with Agamemnon and the revenge of Agamemnon's death and so on. There are 3 characters gathered together on what one may assume to be a terrace. A series of tragedies have just come to an end. Electra, her old nurse, and a beggar, representing the infirm, the blind, and the lame, have witnessed terrible times. The nurse says to me, "Tell me, explain. I can never grasp these things quickly. I can see that something is happening, but I'm not sure I understand. What do you call it when the day is breaking, like today, and everything is spoiled, everything is ruined, and yet you can still breathe the air? And everything has been lost, the city is burning, the innocents are slaughtering each other, and the guilty are dying in the early morning light." Electra tells her, "Ask the beggar, he knows." And the beggar replies, "All that has a very beautiful name. It's called the dawn." Thank you.
Thank you, Richard Smith. Thank you very much.